This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at numberfire.com, and this is episode 607 of the Late Round Podcast, on many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. The 2021 NFL regular season has come to an end, and that means it's time for the playoffs. This Saturday features two wildcard games. The Raiders play the Bengals, and the Patriots play the Bills. And FanDuel is giving you a chance to get in on the wildcard weekend action. All you have to do is head over to FanDuel.com and create your own daily fantasy lineup for the Saturday Million Contest. There are tons of cash prizes to be had, with first place taking home $200,000. So head over to FanDuel today and create your daily fantasy lineups. Eligibility restrictions apply. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app for more details. This is a mailbag show. Let's get to it. The first question this week is from @walk_of_Shane. It's awfully early, but talk a bit about how you see early drafts going next season. Will it be McCaffrey again, or did JT do enough to be the one? Where does Kupp fit in, etc.? So we know the fantasy football masses are pretty reactive to what happened the previous season. There's some really interesting ADP data that shows that when it's a down year for running backs, for example, teams tend to go more wide receiver heavy the next year and then vice versa. I think a lot of people were burned by running backs this year. And even though they were burned by wide receivers as well, we just tend to remember the injuries more. We remember when guys were out for weeks and weeks, sinking our fantasy football hopes and dreams. Especially with early round players like Derrick Henry and Christian McCaffrey. My guess is that Jonathan Taylor is going to be the 101 by ADP next year, and that people will avoid McCaffrey because of his recent injuries. And by avoid, I just mean that there will be a large subset of people who just want nothing to do with him in the early parts of drafts. And with someone like Kupp, I think it's natural for people to want to take him as a top wide receiver. And maybe that's where he ends up landing for me. I don't know. I doubt he will be, but because people are so reactive, it's likely that he ends up being the top wideout. In the days of early round tight ends, at least as early as they were this year, I bet we see that shift a little bit next year as well. Travis Kelce didn't totally live up to expectation, and Darren Waller and George Kittle definitely didn't because of their injuries. So I'd expect tight end ADP to drop a little bit as well in the early rounds. This next question is from @SethHead. Is the time before the NFL draft a good time to make trades in Dynasty? Thinking back to James Robinson's value tanking after the Jags drafted ETN. If somebody had traded Robinson away, obviously not in hindsight, they would have gotten more value pre-draft. Yeah, the answer to this is that it's case by case. But I'll take that a step further and say that it typically is a good idea to make moves based off of assumptions that the public is making. A really good example of this is with James Robinson, yes. But also Mike Davis last year. Now, I didn't like Davis at all in redraft this past year. But before the actual NFL draft happened last year, I talked through how there was just this generally accepted opinion out there that the Falcons would draft a running back. But when you looked at the running back class last year, only 3 guys really stood out. Those 3 being Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, and Javonte Williams. And there were more than 3 running back needy teams. You can't just assume a team is going to get a particular position in the draft just because they need that position, let alone a player who's good playing that position. So my advice is to analyze these assumptions. I'll definitely be talking about them throughout the next couple of months, but understanding how the market is thinking is key in knowing when to buy and sell these players. Because as we know, there's a lot of variance in the draft and how teams approach it. This next question is from @WithParks. Is there any other explanation for what happened with Miles Sanders scoring 0 touchdowns this year beyond it happens? 15 touchdowns between the other 3 running backs, but nothing for the supposed starter. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty wild and unlucky, let's be honest. It seemed like any time a Miles Sanders drive got to the goal line, Jalen Hurts ended up scoring the touchdown. And then anytime any other running back's drive got to the goal line, the running back scored. I wouldn't look much into this aside from it being a very unlucky season for Miles Sanders. It doesn't mean I'm buying him or anything. It just means it was unlucky. Sanders had 137 rush attempts this year and he did not score. Before this season and since 2011, only 6 running backs with 125 or more rush attempts failed to find the end zone on the ground. And Sanders had 6 goal line rushes. That's more than all but one of those running backs in that group of 6. He wasn't going to light the world on fire with his touchdowns this year, but he should have had more than 0. In fact, Pro Football Focus's expected fantasy points model had Miles Sanders at 4.7 expected total touchdowns. That model only had Kyle Pitts among skill position players underperforming more in the touchdown column this year. This next question is from @CaptainChapFF. Any way too early thoughts on a 2022 late round quarterback target? If the pre-draft type doesn't have him fly up the draft board, I think Trey Lance could be what Hurts was this year in terms of value, though Brady and Rodgers were some good later round values in drafts as well. Yeah, I think the obvious answer here is Trey Lance, given what we know he can do with his legs. And I thought that he really progressed well in his second start as that game went on. I think he's going to be an awesome player in fantasy football, especially given the weapons around him. But it's tough to say how people will react to this season. I think Russell Wilson's going to end up falling because he was so mediocre when he came back from his injury, and he also didn't run as much this year. It's not hard to buy into a player like him, though, while hoping that was more of a blip than anything else. But with someone like Joe Burrow having a good season, the pocket passers being really stable, you're going to be able to get a pretty good quarterback as one of the last teams in your league taking one next year. Streaming's still going to be difficult, I think, which is what I talked about on a recent Mailbag episode. But you should be fine with a late round quarterback strategy in 2022. And I hope that Trey Lance is part of that group. This next question is from @JasonCats13. What advice do you have for the people out there with absolutely no college football knowledge who are looking to start learning about the 2022 rookie class and what players might end up mattering in fantasy football? Honestly, just start following draft-related accounts and consuming draft-related content. If you're trying to do this all on your own, like if you're trying to analyze this stuff yourself, I'd say to first figure out what you're good at. Are you able to watch a guy's film and come away with strong takeaways? Or are you more of a data person who's going to get more out of finding trends and how certain statistics translate to the NFL? Now, I'm going to walk through my process with prospecting over the next month or two, so you'll at least get my side to this. But there are really good scouts out there like Dane Brugler, the guys at PFF, who can help you learn this class. I'd start off by just consuming as much content as I could. This next question is from @Brady_Harbaugh. You've spoken on the tight end dead zone before and why to avoid, but it seems this year we may be getting some higher profile guys that could drop into the dead zone, like Darren Waller or TJ Hawkinson. Do any of these types of guys change your strategy if they do land in the dead zone? Thanks. So yeah, middle round tight ends are generally terrible. But as I noted in the preseason, middle round tight ends aren't nearly as terrible when they're the first pass catchers selected from their team, which is why I was into both Hawkinson and Mark Andrews this year, even though they were like fringe middle round guys. We'll just have to see where these guys' ADPs land. And we'll have to see what goes on in their surroundings to see where we should take them. I don't think my strategy is really going to change that dramatically, though. I've mostly been a late round tight end drafter unless I can get a discount on one of those top pass catchers. And honestly, that may be the case for Waller or Hawkinson next year. We just have to wait and see. This last question is from @FFUndefeated. I think that stat on rookie quarterbacks and them not being able to support their receivers holds some water to Terry McLaurin and his quarterback situation, or it at least feels a bit similar. If a rookie quarterback historically can't support their top weapon, then what exactly makes us think that F1 with a fill-in at quarterback, basically someone with the skills of a rookie quarterback, how can we think that McLaurin will finish as a top 5 to 10 wide receiver? So I can't tell you if you're saying this from the perspective of McLaurin entering the 2021 season or McLaurin moving forward. So I'll just answer both. First, the thing that's being referenced here is likely my study on how rookie quarterbacks impact their pass catchers. Basically, we rarely get any sort of elite season from a wide receiver who plays with a rookie quarterback for the majority of the year. It doesn't happen often at all. I don't really think that we can use that data for Terry McLaurin's 2021 season, though, because he obviously didn't have a rookie quarterback. Does poor quarterback play matter? Does it suck for the pass catchers on teams with bad quarterbacks? Yeah, of course. Especially if it ends up changing team philosophy and the team doesn't get as much volume through the air. But entering 2021, we all thought that Ryan Fitzpatrick was going to be the starter. That injury then happens, and that definitely played a role in derailing Terry McLaurin's season. Now, where things go from here, we don't know. If Washington gets a veteran, I'll feel better about McLaurin in redraft. If they get a rookie, it may be good for McLaurin's dynasty value because that rookie could end up hitting. But from a redraft standpoint, the odds are not in his favor. But as usual, guys, it always comes down to cost. Is McLaurin going to have a huge price tag after this season with a rookie quarterback? Maybe not. And it's not like he can't be usable with a rookie quarterback. It's that he likely won't far exceed expectation with one. But if you lower that expectation, as you lower it more and more, there's more room for growth even without a studly wide receiver one season. So there's a lot to unpack here as it relates to whether or not I'd want McLaurin next year. You shouldn't avoid players at all costs because of a study that shows that a player sucks with a rookie quarterback. At the end of the day, a player's cost needs to be factored in, always. The last question this week is from @BGTEvan. In your opinion, what's a statistic or metric that's really overrated by many analysts in the fantasy football industry? Most metrics that deal with efficiency are not very useful. Well, I should say they are useful, but mostly in spotting regression. That's why I don't think that they're worthless to analyze. Just because they're not predictive doesn't make them irrelevant. Because if your competition is utilizing that metric and you know that metric sucks, then you can understand how your competition is thinking and then you can gain an edge. Now let me explain what I mean by that. Yards per carry, not a big deal. It regresses. While some running backs will have better yards per carry rates than others over the long run, it takes a long time for us to know what a player's normal yards per carry is. And not only that, but it's not what's going to drive fantasy points for a running back. Volume is. So if there's a group of people and they're like, oh man, I got to have this one running back because he's a 6.2 yards per carry average. But you know that yards per carry regresses, then you can use that to your advantage. Whether you're talking during your draft or in a trade. Most efficiency statistics are overrated in fantasy football. This game is about volume. And there's a disconnect with some people who think that volume is not a talent statistic. It's absolutely a number driven by talent. If a player is seeing the ball a lot, chances are that player is good. And if that player is good, he's probably going to be good in fantasy football too. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet subscribed to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Thanks for listening this week, everyone. Really appreciate it. Enjoy your weekend. I'll talk to you next week.